Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. Welcome to another special podcast on the National Rehabilitation Centre. Today, we're with Dr. Michael Craven, Principal Research Fellow at the University of Nottingham. This podcast looks at the development of rehabilitation technology. We discuss access communication technology, co-designing rehabilitation with patients and healthcare professionals, and we have a more in-depth look into the development of exoskeleton rehab technologies. Hi Mike, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, pleased to be here.
Good. So today we're going to talk about the development of rehabilitation technologies. We'll discuss access communication technology, co-designing rehabilitation with patients and healthcare professionals, and we'll have a more in-depth look into the development of exoskeleton rehab technologies. But before we do, and to get us started, just let us know, where did your career begin?
Yeah, so I arrived in Nottingham at the University of Nottingham at the end of the 1980s to pursue a master's degree in electronic engineering. And so I spent a year doing that, and then I was fortunate to have a funding for a research council PhD. And that introduced me to some of the techniques which I use now. So I actually researched neural networks. I was looking at hardware versions of neural networks, but that sort of led me to sort of learn a lot of the techniques that are used in machine learning and pattern recognition. Then I went on to work in computer science, and I worked with virtual reality equipment and designing systems, working with members of the public and professionals to develop sort of multi-user virtual reality. And in between that, I started off using virtual reality sensors for an assistive technology device, which I can tell you more about.
Yes, so you've led us perfectly to one of the areas we were going to talk about. So I think we're going to touch upon access to communication and technology. Do you want a starting point there? What do you do there, and how does that kind of systems work?
The access to communication and technology are actually a partner of a research project of mine, which I pursued as a postdoctoral researcher. And so we were interested in developing a gesture-based interface for people with motor and speech difficulties. And so we use the virtual reality sensors to record people's gestures and then convert those to vocabulary access system. So our partner Access and Communication Technology were specifying as what are called augmentative and alternative communication devices. So this was an innovation in that area.
So have you got a specific example of the kind of disabilities that you may be working with? And how that translated? So was it people with speech difficulties? What was it specifically?
Yes. So and obviously, as the disabilities can be fairly complex. Yeah, we aimed at people with cerebral palsy, but also traumatic brain injury. So somebody that might have a motor disability, but also their disability also means that they have difficulty being understood. At least by maybe outside of their family. So the idea was to produce a system where a person could convert their gestures into speech.
Oh, but so it come with some certain gestures would come with an audio to somebody who didn't know them, so they could communicate, and live life as the best that they could.
Yes, that's right. So it's quite an early stage research project, but what we decided to do is to employ what were then sort of state of the art virtuality sensors, and these are things that are sort of built into virtuality headsets and gloves, and they allow you to measure your arm movement, in this case in 3 dimensions. So what we were doing was we were capturing those movements, and we actually were allowing an individual to make the gestures that they could and wanted to make. And then once we built up a set of those gestures could be used in a vocabulary access system. So essentially we were connecting specific gestures to either specific sentences or even letters of the alphabet if a person had enough gestures in order to build up speech, text and then speech that the speech synthesizer could speak.
And in terms of, I would imagine, and we've touched upon this prior to recording this podcast, around how you develop that, because obviously you can't just go and design that yourself. So do you want to talk us through that process? Were you working with the patient? Were you working with the family? Were you working with clinicians? How did that whole system work?
Yes, well, that's a great question, because when I started my career in I say with my master's and PhD, I was essentially lab based. I was building things and I was designing things, but I was essentially testing them myself. And so this was really the first project where it was much more applied, but also I was encountering the public, patients and clinicians. So all of those that you mentioned. And so that was one of the great things about partnering with ACT, that they were able to give us access to the patients, but they were also the people that they were already supporting with other technologies. So we worked very closely with them, and they found persons that they were already in contact with that were being interested in pursuing the research project. And so we essentially designed the system for individuals, but also with in mind that it could be used for anybody with a motor and speech difficulty.
It's really cool to hear. Like, we just briefly touch upon that communication side, and obviously we've already done an introduction to the NRC type podcast, and it was really clear that there's just so many people coming together to try and create this really innovative, forward-thinking way of rehabilitating people. But this has been going on already, probably in separate pockets, and then the NRC is trying to bring a lot of this together. So that was on the communication side of things. And I know what we want to move forward is to talk a little bit more about the musculoskeletal rehabilitation technology. And can you just talk us through what first got you into this side of things at all?
Yeah, so if we fast forward, I had some time away from Nottingham, and I came back, and I was involved with what turned out to be a 10-year Research Council EPSRC funded program, looking at methods and also applying methods for evaluating medical devices, and also so we're working very closely with developers of devices, but also their users. And so we were applying sort of quite a holistic approach to that. So we were looking at the design process, health economics, and other aspects that are now much more important if we're thinking about introducing a new device. So that introduced me to all kinds of devices, from implants, orthopedic implants, wound care devices, diagnostics, you name it. And we did that. And over 10 years, we developed methodologies that were suited to evaluating devices. Now, if in the NHS, there is, in fact, at the same time that we were involved in this research program, the NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, was developing its medical technologies evaluation program. So we essentially tracked that. And in fact, I worked on one of the pilot projects for that program as part of an assessment centre. And so I got quite deeply into the whole process of how you evaluate innovations, and particularly device innovations. So that was a 10-year program, and we learned a lot through that. We published a lot. And we encountered a lot of different devices. And then fast forward another 10 years, I'm now based in the Institute of Mental Health in a National Institute for Health and Care Research funded group called a MedTech Cooperative. So we're called the MindTech MedTech Cooperative. And what we do is we work very closely with any technology related to mental health and dementia. So essentially, I've spanned the whole sort of physical and mental health spectrum over the last 20 years. And with my earlier interest in rehabilitation technologies and assistive technologies, I've sort of come back now to as well as my work with MindTech, to think about the rehabilitation, the role of devices in rehabilitation. With this specific project, which we called Exo Rehab NHS, and the NHS part's important, we were interested in looking at whether exoskeleton technology could be used in the NHS. And obviously I'll say a little bit more about what exoskeleton technology is all about.
Definitely, that's where you're leading us perfectly down the road where we're going. So Before we get specifically into the exoskeleton, could you just kind of give us some insight into what musculoskeletal rehabilitation technology is before we go into exoskeleton specifically?
Obviously, there are a range of conditions involved, but one of the main areas is for us is spinal cord injury. So if you have an accident which affects your spine, so it could be either a complete or incomplete injury of the spinal cord, and that can affect your ability to walk and also has other health issues involved.
You just mentioned there about spinal cord injuries. And I know when we chatted before, we had a bit of a tenuous link in that you mentioned your uncle being involved in wheelchair basketball. We have wheelchair basketball here at Loughborough. And actually, you have been involved with the Matt Hampson Foundation. And I met Matt Hampson a number of years ago. And I'm pretty sure, I know we spoke about them potentially playing wheelchair rugby at my old college. The wheelchair rugby team, I'm pretty sure they played there. But it'd be interesting just to give us a bit of an insight around your uncle and the developments there, and maybe a little bit touch upon some of the Matt Hampson Foundation and the developments there, and then we'll go back for exoskeletons. So to go back to the point, tenuous link between you and I around wheelchair basketball or wheelchair users in sport. So you just tell a little bit about your uncle and the background there.
So I've got an early sort of family connection to rehabilitation. Yes, my uncle had a spinal cord injury, and he went through his rehabilitation at Stoke Mandeville, and through that he became involved with paraplegic sport, including swimming and wheelchair basketball. And his sporting career took him through wheelchair basketball all the way to becoming the president of the IPC, the International Paralympic Committee, for many years. And I remember as a child when he first obtained his a new wheelchair, which was a rigid frame and cambered wheels, and I think I was really only a child, but I was able to the excitement of having this device that would really improve the game. And one of the other things I've since learned is how much that innovation was pushed by the players themselves, partly to demedicalize the sport, but also those innovations had to align with the rules of the game, and everything from cambered wheels to extra rims on the wheels, and other aspects of the design. And that was really sort of pushed by the players. And I think that this idea of, let's say, user-led or innovation is incredibly important. That's something that I'm very much involved with now in my research, and that's why I spend a lot of time working with end users, whether they're patients or healthcare professionals, in either in the design process of medical technologies or in their evaluation. And it's important to do both, and it becomes a bit of a mantra, but you can never do these things too early. You need to involve users early. You need to think about the system problems or system issues of introducing devices into the NHS, and that's everything. That includes the economics. It includes aspects that are beyond the design of the specific purpose of the device. I'm
a big believer that all experience can have that impact upon you throughout your career and throughout your life. So the fact that you had that in your background, and you could see that you were really interested in that design and how it was designed through your uncle, that surely has led to, in some maybe small part, into your understanding of how these innovations develop, and the importance of that end user being at the core of this development. So I'm sure all those experiences have helped you really in your career. Now, we did also mention the Matt Hampson Foundation. Have you done some work with the Matt Hampson Foundation?
Yeah, so in the project on exoskeletons, we were fortunate to be located quite close to the Matt Hampson Foundation Get Busy Living Centre, and we were invited there to see the equipment that they were using, and we talked to physiotherapists and also beneficiaries of the charity, who some of those who had actually had spinal injury themselves, and told us about their rehabilitation journey and the equipment that they were using. And that was incredibly important to the research project. one of the things that I very much do in my research when I'm talking to healthcare professionals and also end users is to try and take a step back, and that back to say it's not to say, so if you say, what do you think of, exoskeletons or robotic devices, people will either, there might be a reaction which is either really, really positive or really negative or somewhere in between, particularly if somebody hasn't encountered that technology before. So if you take that step back, what I do when I take a step back is and this is part of qualitative research, is not to necessarily go straight in and ask about the new technology, but to say what would make a difference in your rehabilitation journey. What equipment do you use now? What equipment do you, what issues do you have with that? Is there anything that you'd like to have? Let's say if you had £100,000, what would you have in your home? And it's interesting when you ask the questions in those ways. You get honest answers, and it's very, very revealing. So when we ask those questions to the Matt Hampson Foundation, we learnt a lot about the technologies we were interested in this case, the exoskeletons, but we learnt about what people's would like, what they thought, and also their experience of using things like functional electrical stimulation devices, adaptive hoists, and other equipment. And so it was very useful to hear about that within the context of rehabilitation. And I should also say we were the physiotherapists at the centre were also very happy to talk to us about the equipment and how they were using it.
I really like that question. Very, very person centric in terms of, if you could have £1,000, what would you do to help? I'm not sure, off the cuff here, were you involved at all in the actual design of the NRC with anyone? Were the conversations there? Because from the introduction podcast, it was very much seems like it's been designed with user in mind. And they spoke about, we haven't got wards, and we're making sure that the beds are all, you've got access to the outdoors. And there was numerous elements where I thought, this has really been thought out for the end user, for their families, for clinicians to kind of really come together. Have you been involved with that at all?
Yes, I have. I'm part of the University of Nottingham research stream, whose aim is to develop research around the forthcoming National Rehabilitation Centre, so of the NHS hospital at Stamford Hall. And so the idea of the research stream is develops some research in that area. And as part of that, there's a wider group that was involved in specifying the design of the hospital. So there's many people involved, and so I represent the Institute of Mental Health in the research stream, and some of the questions about the design came through to that group. So it's a very, very small contribution, I have to say, but and many people have done a lot of work to try and make this new hospital state of the art.
I mean, and it really sounds like it is, and I'm sure that everybody, all of you coming together to develop rehabilitation in this setting will just, take things to another level. So let's just concentrate a little bit more then on the kind of exoskeleton side of things. How did you start to develop research in this area, and what are exoskeletons?
Yes, well, I had a long-term relationship with clinical engineering at Nottingham University hospitals, and we'd actually had a previous conversation that the NHS supply chains were interested in exoskeletons, and because of some other work we've been doing in the area of robotics, it seemed like a good project to apply some of our user-led techniques to. So we teamed up with NUH and so there were a couple of us from Mindtech, and we also had a patient and public involvement volunteer who joined that from the Mindtech involvement team. So the four of us got together, and we essentially designed the interviews that we used with Matt Hansen, but also with some independent physiotherapists. What we were interested in doing was looking at the experience of exoskeletons as they're being used now, so not in the NHS, but in independent practice, and also in being in the context of charities. And so, I mean, one of the issues about exoskeletons is they're quite high cost. They're also quite new, but they do have some specific benefits that have been identified for in the rehabilitation process. So as the name suggests, an exoskeleton it's a device that you wear around your body. It's typically an electromechanical device. And if it's used for spinal cord injury, it's typically called a lower limb exoskeleton, and so that device essentially is a sort of metal frame that sits outside your body, and you essentially wear it, so you or step into it. So it would support your trunk. It would have motorized joints, so specifically your hip and knee joints, and you step into a foot plate, and then the device would allow you would support you in walking. And one of the main purposes is to in rehabilitation is to help with getting back a natural gait pattern.
Okay, so it fully
helps you walk, essentially.
Yeah, so it fully helps you stand upright. It fully helps you walk. Is that the case? So what kind of patients would use this and benefit from it? And I'm trying to get my own understanding, really. Is this something that is part of the rehabilitation process? So it's to help teach walking again and potentially remove the exoskeleton once it's developed, or is this a device that is actually used for people who may never be able to walk themselves, or is it both?
Yeah, so it is both, and so there are some benefits of using the exoskeleton during recovery and rehabilitation. So it can be used to improve neuropathic pain and inflammation. It can be used to improve muscle tone. It also has some benefits in bowel and bladder health. So that act of standing. So essentially, the device itself can help you stand and also take steps. So it is used in the rehabilitation process itself. But I think exoskeletons are interesting because they sort of sit on that cusp of rehabilitation, but also assistive devices. So this idea that the device could help you walk, it's a little bit more complicated than that, and certainly within there's a lot of training involved in using the device, and it's several weeks of training, and really you can't use the device without that training. And there's also an assessment process to go through before you can safely use the device. But once there are users that use them in their everyday life as an assistive device, but typically you really need to use crutches with it, and also to have somebody with you to make sure that you don't fall. So that's during rehabilitation. There are some people that become expert users and can essentially use that more or less on their own, but you need some support.
So how long have these type of devices been available? And what are we talking here in the UK? How prevalent are they? How available are they? And around the world? Because it seems like a very innovative new kind of thing. So where are we at with that?
There are a number of different brands of exoskeletons as well, and there are a lot in research. I think they've been going really about just a little bit more than 10 years. The brands that are available in the UK. And when we were doing our study, we found 5 different exoskeletons that were being used by physiotherapists in independent practice in the UK, and several more that had been looked at. Yes, so there are a number of devices available.
And so far, you've mentioned private practice. Are they being used in the NHS? Yes, I know you mentioned NHS supply chain. Is this something that is happening already? Is it in process for NHS to be taking some of this technology on?
Yeah. So obviously things might have changed since we did our study, but at the moment they're not really being used in the NHS. There are some devices that are being looked at that are sort of lesser support devices, such as lumbar support devices, and they're also being manufactured by the same companies that make exoskeletons. So there's beginnings of use. So there's also interest in them within NHS trusts. So there are a number of examples of studies that are using exoskeletons. One example is trying for people with multiple sclerosis. There's also interest in using them for stroke.
And I imagine one of the main reasons I presume that they're not being used in the NHS is the cost. Like what kind of cost are we talking for these devices?
Yeah, so we're really talking sort of tens of thousands of pounds, and really it's sort of 70,000 upwards to 150 plus, so £1,000. So quite expensive, and there's also the training that's involved. So many of the devices that are used in the UK have been acquired by individuals, often through sort of medical legal routes, so essentially compensation for accidents, and so those individuals are using those, but also they are available and being used through the private practice physiotherapy practices, as you mentioned. But that's amongst the other equipment. And actually, if you look at the cost of an exoskeleton compared to, let's say, an adaptive hoist, actually an exoskeleton can cost less than an adaptive hoist. However, it costs more than a functional electrical stimulation device. So there's a whole spectrum of devices that are used in rehabilitation. And I think one of the things that we found is there are some newer devices that are becoming available that are available for less cost. And I think we'll see quite a bit there's a lot of interest in it, in developing exoskeletons. And so I think that the price may reduce in the future, and that might make it more available to the National Health Service. But it should also be said, the NHS spends a huge amount of money on technologies, whether those technologies are drugs or devices. And so so that an assessment can always be made on its cost effectiveness, and that some of that work, a little bit of the work's been done in that area, but that would need to be done before those devices were sort of offered routinely in the NHS.
Well, as you said, I mean, to be honest, the price that you quoted there, 70 to 150,000, was less than I thought it would be. I thought it might be even more than that. And obviously you mentioned it's been kind of in development and around for 10 years. So with any technology kind of device, the hope would be that price will continue to fall, because a lot of that research and development cost has been, the Apple Pro visual AI thing. I think it's about £4,000 at the moment. So I'm sure that's going to come down. With any technology, this happens, doesn't it? So hopefully those costs will come down. Where do you see things moving forward in the future in this space? So if you could, again, I did ask this on the introduction for the NRC, but specifically around your research and exoskeleton, musculoskeletal rehab, what is the future? So what's the NRC going to be able to develop and do to push this space forward?
So there's a big opportunity for the National Rehabilitation Centre to be involved in evaluating new technologies of all kinds, and the exoskeletons can be one part of that. And what I see happening in the future is that, at the moment, exoskeletons are essentially electromechanical devices. You control the sit to stand with an interface to that device. Typically, to get a walking pattern in play, you would start walking or lean forward, and then the device would sense your movement and then help you produce a natural gait pattern, and essentially then you're walking. Now, I think in the future there'll be a lot more emphasis on adaptive technology. So we might think about having sort of a neural interface, maybe to detect your intention to walk. There'll be innovations in other areas of design, and I think that's where the National Rehabilitation Centre can hopefully get those devices, some of those devices, and work with developers early and introduce patients to them and see their benefits and prove their benefits. And my research is about evidence-based medicine, and producing that evidence is critical. So essentially many NHS trusts are involved in clinical studies and developing evidence for technologies. But having a centre that's dedicated to rehabilitation technology can only be a good thing.
And just a piece with some of the pieces you've said there, because you talked about evaluation and the development of such devices. Is this happening within universities? Is this happening within the NHS? Or is this the private sector more often than not developing these? Or is it that true collaboration of all those sectors?
Yeah, it is all of the above, and there is collaboration. So and some of that collaboration is European. There's a really interesting project between the UK and France looking at developing new mechanical designs for exoskeletons, and there are UK universities are involved in that. So there is university research, but there are also a number of startup companies. And as we said, some of the companies that produced the earlier exoskeletons are still around and developing their technologies further. And then also, as I mentioned, it's the users, the user base is critically important. So, so we have the independent physiotherapists that are using them. Maybe more individuals will start using them. But part of our project was to look at how it might be delivered. And one of the ideas that came up was having almost possibly, and again, this is hypothetical, but having a community hub where somebody could come in and try an exoskeleton, and they could be supported in doing that. So that hub could provide the training that's needed, but also an introduction to a device that may be quite expensive for the individual. And that might then result in the use of those devices. So there are a number of ways which where this area could develop.
So in terms of, we're starting to run out of time, in terms of your research and your future, where do you think that is in the next kind of 5 to 10 or plus years? What would your research be looking into, and what developments are we hoping for?
So with my role in Mindtech, so that's our centre that's focused on mental health. Mental health is one thing that's often maybe given second thought in the rehabilitation process, but as we know, motivation is incredibly important, but also that many people with physical injuries also have mental health problems, and I think that sort of holistic approach is going to be more and more important. So I hope to sort of bring together the work that's being done in the National Rehabilitation Centre with my research in Mindtech to look at some of the mental health aspects of recovery and rehabilitation.
It's a really good point that you've added there about the physical and mental side coming together. And I think when we spoke previously, you talked about the benefits of the exoskeleton mentally as well, just that standing up and the feeling alongside those other benefits we mentioned before. So it would be really interesting to see where you move forward in this space. And I really do, hope that the NRC really enhances the amazing work that you're already doing.
So one of the other areas that I'm really keen to develop over the next few years is the use of virtual reality, and there's virtual reality equipment which is going to be available through the NRC. But we're currently using virtual reality in therapies, in mental health therapies, and we just finished a big clinical trial called Game Change, where we were developing and using sort of step cognitive therapy within a virtual environment. And that trial was finished and it was very successful. So, and there's a lot of interest in virtual reality, and in fact, Mindtech's involved with a program called Mindset, where we're working with a lot of developers of innovative virtual reality and also what's called extended reality, so augmented reality and mixed reality in the health space. And so, virtual reality also has a role in training people to use assistive devices, and indeed is already being used with exoskeletons as part of training. So there's a really good opportunity to sort of marry the virtual reality research with the more sort of engineering electromechanical research that goes into developing exoskeletons. So again, that brings me back to some of my older research in VR and into the future.
It's great for you to be bringing that in, because again, with the NRC wanting it to be innovative and all the different people that are coming together in this, bringing in things like VR and AI and all these kind of technologies that everybody's starting to hear more and more about, and knowing that in the background, you guys are researching this and moving this forward to enhance rehabilitation. It's really exciting time for you all. Everybody I've spoke to so far just constantly has a smile on their face to just go, this is going to be something big. And it's great talking to you all.
Yeah, it is really exciting, and I've also got the opportunity to go down to the Royal Society Summer Science Festival and explain this to hundreds of thousands of children. So I'm very much looking forward to that as well.
well, getting children, the next generation of researchers, really excited about it, or even children that, are thinking about needing these types of rehabilitation technologies. That's just brilliant, isn't it? That your work is impacting potential future careers and future lives is what it should be all about.
Absolutely. The scientists of the future. So yes. So we hope to inspire obviously we'll be down there as the Loughborough University and University of Nottingham team working together on the stand, and we'll have that stand for the whole week. So I'll do my bit for 2 days and speak to the public, and I really enjoy doing that as well.
Brilliant. I'm sure they will massively benefit from hearing from you and seeing what your work involves. I just really want to kind of appreciate and thank you for your time. We've touched upon, hopefully our listeners have got some real good information now on rehabilitation technologies. It was really exciting to hear about your career and how you've developed from that engineering side of things, going through to gain and show real understanding of the person-centered approach and that multidisciplinary team kind of developing these technologies. And then the advancement. And, I really enjoyed the small part we touched upon around the communication side of things and how you've developed that further into other elements. And then the musculoskeletal side and the exoskeletons, which sound like a really exciting, way of moving forward with rehabilitation. Let's hope those costs come down and they start to become more accessible to everyone. So I'd love to thank you for your time. Much appreciate you coming on the podcast. Hopefully I'll come down to the NRC and I'll bump into you in person at some point.
That's great to have the opportunity to talk about my research, and I say my research is research of, as you say, of an interdisciplinary team, and I think that's one of the key things about this research is that it is multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and we need engineers, but we also need clinicians, we need sociologists and psychologists all to be working together, and of course we need to be working closely with the healthcare professionals that are delivering it and the patients and the end users of the technologies themselves. So I hope to continue that. Okay, thank you very much, Martin, for having me. And hopefully I'll be back at some point to talk more about the research associated with the NRC.
Definitely, I'd love to hear from you again. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.